Okay.
Your great-grandfather, the Canfield family, came from England and settled quite a few of them around the Springfield, Illinois area. Then as it became populated there, Dad said they thought the land was worn out, so they came from the west looking for land. And that's when they came out to this area here. Great-great-grandfather Canfield had 3 wives. So he had a lot of ancestors.
He had 3 wives?
He
outlived
3 wives.
Oh, he outlived, not at the same time.
No.
I was hoping we didn't have Mormon roots there.
Or trigamous.
Okay.
But I just read that the other day that he had.
Wow.
They all had large families, and the reason they remarried, is because they had several children.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, they had no one to take care of the house, no one to take care of the children. So it's quite common for a widower and a widower to marry whether they loved each other or not, because it is a necessity of taking care of their family.
Mm-hmm.
And but several of those families came and lived in this Cuba area, Belleville area. And Dad, Grandpa Frank, we're over south of east here, about 6, 7, 8 miles in the sod house that Richard has told you about. And then they had moved over to the Cuba area, which is about 15, 20 miles southeast of here. And then my great-grandpa worked for someone over in the Cuba area, and they no longer needed, so they came up and bought this home up here.
Okay, so
you're a lot of Canfields in this area, besides Dad's.
Okay,
Frank.
so your dad was named Frank.
And his father was named Frank.
And his father was Frank too. Okay.
But they were of English heritage that migrated here.
This is the road that I came each morning from the home a mile east here to pick up Lee Boyd, who we'll see in a few moments. Then I'd come back by the house, go on to Chester. Then at night, of course, I had to take him home, so I made extra 5 miles a day just for this one student. Whether it's worth or not, I have no idea. But if this is no gravel in those days, so if it's muddy, it means I had mud tires on the old Model A, and if anybody could go, I could go with the Model A. And even then, I've been in the mud so badly that both rear wheels are balled up solid that I couldn't even move. I couldn't do it here. And going immediately ahead here to the right, there's used to be a bridge, an underpass. The train went over us, and I understand it's down now since the railroad track has been out. This is a corner I'd take to the Boyd
Well,
farm.
there's part of the bridge still there.
Right. Now there's the bridge. The road used to go up here and through that arch. This is the first time they've been along here. They bypassed it entirely. Let's go right here now. So we'd curve through that into it. And I can remember when the water was high that filled half of that space. We were in 10 feet of water here right now.
Yeah, there's something on the bridge. What does it say? 1907.
Okay, that was before me, but that's when it was built, probably. And so that's where the railroad crossed. Then immediately ahead to the right, about 300 yards, is where another high grade school was, 2 miles from the Victor, 2 miles east. And this is where Don and where our dad went to school, with that little area in here called Lowland. Lowland along the, I guess, the Rose Creek. And that was the lowland area where Dad and his brothers and sisters went. And then we'll turn into this next driveway to the right.
Well, it's still there. There's still someone living there.
And then I'd come in.
Barn is there.
That used to be one of the bigger, one of the most elaborate farms in the area. Was this farm where I stopped to pick up Lee Boyd. It had acetylene lamps, and they had lighting. Of course, that was very fun. That was big time stuff in my day. And this gentleman was this is a very nice farm. Had a big barn down in the area. And one thing I remember on, he had a temper. And if he'd get angry at his horses, he'd jab them with a pitchfork. He'd jab them so hard they'd bleed, but that's the way he punished them. He was a very cruel man. But I'd swing in here, pick up Lee, and go back. But how did these acetylene stove lights work, Donald? They had some kind of a...
They had kind of a wick in them.
And they got the gas from... It used to have some white...
They used to have a generator.
And did they made some kind of gas somehow, carbide gas or something?
Yeah.
That's how they lit their... And it was something.
That's the same barn that the old man Boyd built.
Is that right?
And that's what Dad always said what put him under during the Depression. He had just built that great big barn.
Never recovered from it, huh? So this is the end of my high school driving route.
Okay, you're saying that he finished 4th grade when he was 16?
That's what I understand. They only went 2 or 3 months in the fall.
Oh.
We have his old grade record. He was a good student, but you look at the days of absence. When the snow set in, then he would go to school. I can't say how old he was, but he was quite old, and he remembers that they had kids in school. The boys were as large as a teacher, and they were 16, 17 years old.
Right.
So I probably misspoke myself, but Dad, it took several years because of the fact he always had to work.
Right.
And so he was not promoted every year.
But he had the equivalent of a 4th grade education, which today would probably be equivalent of a much higher grade.
Yeah, I think you're right. Did I send you the email of the 8th grade exam, graduation exam?
Yeah.
Yes.
We had in Salina.
That's quite something.
Somebody. My goodness, the average high school graduate couldn't pass it today. Some college student would have a real struggle with it.
You remember the house a half a mile north there, don't you?
Oh, the Kelly. Mr. and Mrs. Kelly.
So where are we now?
We are now on the eastern side of the old home place, 103 acres, on the place where Dad was originally lived as a family. And this is the old pasture. And I was just reminiscing a moment ago, the creek is right ahead of us, a few hundred feet, and after a heavy storm, we normally checked out the fence because the heavy rain through the creek sometime would take out the fence. And Don and I were down here on the creek, and it was flowing almost bank high. The fence had been fixed, and we were sitting there as just a couple boys. I guess he was 10 and I was 14, or 14 and 18, something like that. And we were just, as we saw the water sort of rushing by us, I said, "What do you give me if I jump in?" As I recall, he said, "I'll give you $10. I didn't even stop to think. I jumped even with my glasses on. Went in, and it was probably several feet deep. And I came up, though, realizing my glasses were gone. So I had to dive and found them, believe you me, on the bottom of the creek and came up. And I got back on, drenched with my glasses. He said, "What do you give me if I jump in?" I said, $5. So he jumped in. I made $5 out of the jumps. Then 40 years later, over here at the pond, we had our 90th celebration for Mother's birthday anniversary. And we were at the edge of the pond here, and I was telling the story, and I asked Mark's dad, Ron, I said, "What do you give me to jump in?" He said, $10. So I jumped in that with all my clothes on. So I collected another $10. But that's the last time the family came down here as a family, was Grandma's 90th birthday, which is approximately, well, I'd say probably 20 years ago. And Don has developed this out, and he's got a nice fishing area here. a lot of reserve of water. And now his son-in-law, no, grandson, is enlarging with the equipment. And this is supplied with a spring that's been operating now for 100 years. But one of the few springs that I know in miles around. And this is the old home place. Right to the rear of us, and Mark can swing around and take a picture of the trees behind him. I was bringing some cattle along the side of the creek bank, right in through there, and there was a barbed wire fence parallel to the creek bank, and I unwisely drove Beauty off the edge of the bank down into the creek, and her legs slipped in between the wire and the bank. In a few moments I found her, we were impaled over a barbed wire fence stretched between her legs and her stomach and rear leg, which is highly dangerous because once she started thrashing, she would lash herself, probably kill herself with the barbed wire. I got off the saddle and I shouted from right where we are, this far, I shouted up to the house a half a mile away and yelling for Dad's help. And fortunately, Dad heard me up on the farm. He came running down and had of course he always carried a pliers in his pocket, cut the barbed wire, saved the horse, and saved me from a very traumatic experience. But meanwhile, I was holding her, petting her, keeping her quiet, because once she made some moves, she would have just severed, the barbed wire just severed her veins underneath her stomach and legs. So it was a very dangerous situation that we recovered, and I thank the Lord that Dad came to my rescue a half a mile away through the only. And we would call our hogs up at the farm from the pasture down here. We would call them, and sometimes, and the horses, by yelling at them. In a few moments we'll try to rehearse that with Don, our yell that would bring the livestock in. Okay. If you tell us, you think that's good enough? Can you get it with the wind? Dad would often have to would usually call the horses in the morning out of the pasture up on the farm here, about a half mile from here. And then oftentimes we'd call the hogs. The hogs would be down here in the summertime and in the creek where it's cool, and we'd call the hogs up for feeding. And Don and I are going to try to call in the horses now as remembered 50 years ago. So imagine the horses out of sight, several acres away, and we needed the horses. And this is sort of how it went. Co, 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 boys, co, co, co. Good job. Don did a better job. Then the hogs coming up for a half a mile here. What was it like? Suey. Suey. Suey, 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 suey. And the hogs would come running half a mile, the horse would come running up, and that saved a lot of time.
And that's the truth. Well, the hogs, Dad fed his hogs and cattle very well, and the hogs would come up because he gave them a mixture of ground oats and corn and buttermilk and molasses.
And then he'd soak it.
And he'd soak it and let it ferment.
All day. And boy, at night that would be all foamed up and fermented. And oh, it was like oat.
And they would run a mile for a bite of that stuff. Well, the weeds have come up again, but what Brian has done is he's gone all the way along that north side.
What did he back up for?
He went along the side and did it, dug it out all the way along the edge.
Did he back along here and pull it up behind him?
No,
he couldn't drive along the north.
He drove along there.
But he must have done before he sold the building.
And then he put the dirt over on the other side. He got a little pile. He went over the down and slid in.
Slid in? over this into a picnic area. You can still do that again, Donald.
Yeah, that's what I like to do.
Get this smoothed off. The spring is right in there somewhere, right? Brian shot a coyote out of that tree. I think he called him in and shot a coyote out of that tree.
Great spot for a picnic.
Right in this area, there used to have a box about 2.5 foot square. And that set over the spring. During the drought, it dried up. Dad did many things to get it going again. After I left, it still was not going. Don picked up the story here. A friend decided he was going to dynamite it. Go ahead, Don.
There's only very few that knew about everything, pretty much a handyman. So Dad called him out, and he got several sticks of dynamite, wrapped them together, and put wax around them, lit them, and dropped them down there. When he dropped them, we went over the little hump there, and when they went off, we looked up, and the whole casing, this box Richard's talking about, the casing was about 8 to 10 feet deep. It blew the whole thing up in the air, and it came right back down into that. So then still no water. So we had to build a new casing, but still we were having problems, and then the water table began to rise. This was the old ditch where the water went. Dad changed it, it's over there, but at that time it was there, and since there was enough seepage in there, the old hogs would come down there in the wintertime, or summertime, and they get deeper and deeper and deeper, and they finally got to the point where the spring was in the bottom of that. So this is the old well. The spring was probably in here somewhere. It was not doing too well, so I got a diaphragm pump from the county and brought it in here with a long hose in it, and I started pumping it to see how much it would pump. And in that process, apparently I cleaned out a passageway because it began to flow. And if you can see the rate of flow here, if you walk out on that plank, Mark, you'll see the rate of flow. It's still pretty good, and it would be more if it is lower.
I'll bet you that
It's flowing pretty good.
that could be 30 to 40 gallon a minute.
I would tend to think, yeah, that'd be a good estimate. But so I had a gate across there so we could raise the level, and but the wilderness takes over pretty fast.
And then just beyond this little bank to the north, we made a pond. After the water started flowing, we put a windmill over it, and the windmill fed that little pond. It's only 150 feet square maybe, right just over the hump there. The water was about 2.5 feet deep was ever, and that's where I hunted duck and where I learned to swim. And you take a dive off that bank, you had to dive shallow or you'd have mud on your stomach every time you came up. And if you dove too smooth, you stuck in. So that was the little pond that my experience. Dad had a pond earlier in his life down there, and Donald did this pond, so he had 3 generations enjoying 3 generations of ponds.
Brian has built a dam all the way around.
Oh, there is a dam?